Now, many of you know me. You know that my position is that China is not a socialist country, but I've always been on the fence as to whether or not it is an imperialist country. However, a new development certainly demonstrates to me that China is in fact imperialist. And it's important to keep in mind imperialism doesn't necessarily need war in order to be imperialist. Now, what's happening is that Ecuador is planning to auction off more than 3 million hectares of pristine Amazon rainforests to Chinese oil companies, much to the dismay of many indigenous leaders. The Ecuadorian politicians have pitched bidding contracts to representatives from Chinese oil companies at a Hilton hotel in central Beijing on the fourth leg of a roadshow to publicize the bidding process. Previous meetings in Ecuador's capital, Quito, I hope I'm saying that right. Now, of course, all of these events were protested by indigenous groups and other people who are concerned about these developments. Now, the 7 indigenous groups that inhabit the land claim that they have not consented to the oil projects, which means this is being done against their will. And what's very interesting is this goes against China's own policies. The deal would violate China's own new investment guidelines jointly issued by the Ministries of Commerce and Environmental Protection last month. The third clause of the guideline says Chinese enterprises should promote harmonious development of the local economy, environment, and community while operating abroad. Now, many others noted the reason for this is probably due to the nature of the economic relationship between China and Ecuador. Critics say the national debt may be a large part of the Ecuadorian government's calculations. Ecuador owed China more than 4.6 billion pounds or $7 billion as of last summer, more than a tenth of its GDP. China began loaning billions of dollars to Ecuador in 2009 in exchange for oil shipments. More recently, China helped fund 2 of its biggest hydroelectric infrastructure projects. Ecuador may soon build a $12.5 billion oil refinery with Chinese financing. Now, this development of the rainforest has already been ruled illegal, actually. Last July, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights ruled to prohibit all oil developments in the Sarayaku, a tropical rainforest territory in southern Ecuador that is only accessible by plane or by canoe, in order to preserve its rich cultural heritage and biodiversity. In other words, they can't begin drilling for oil there because it would disrupt the environment, something that China says that they are against in their own infrastructure development program. Now, the court also mandated the government obtain free, prior, and informed consent from native groups before approving oil activities on their indigenous land, which all 7 of the indigenous groups say they did not give. Why is China doing this? If China was really sticking by its guns and its stated moral position, then they would be getting permission from those indigenous people, but they're not. They're just bidding up the land anyway. The question is, why is land with oil in it being sold to a foreign country? It shouldn't be. It should be China should be helping them domestically produce and then sell to China or trade to China. Why is the land being sold to the Chinese company where China owns it? This is imperialism. And despite what many people think, you don't necessarily have to go to war for there to be imperialism. You can do that without it. Imperialism is economic control of one country by another, particularly a rich country controlling a poor country. And this doesn't have to take the form of war. This can happen through policy, and it still makes it imperialism. This land should not be under Chinese control. And a lot of people will say, well, China are helping them develop. No, they're not helping them develop this land. They are taking it and owning it. There is a very big difference. If the U.S. comes into Ecuador, buys up a bunch of oil fields, or buys up areas that are said to be good for oil, and then develops them absent of the permission of the indigenous population, would you be saying the same thing? We have almost the exact same scenario, just one with the Chinese or one with the Americans. They're both imperialism. They are both indigenous lands being used for profit by another country with disregard to the indigenous population. And this violates China's own stated rules. I think this is a definite good sign that China is turning imperialist, that it has imperialist interests. It loaded up the country with debt and then exchanged it for oil. Why didn't they just help them develop rather than giving them loans and then making them pay back interest? That's really not the best way to do, socialist unity, even though, Ecuador is obviously not a socialist country. You don't go buying up that country's land. I'm sorry, but this is a definite piece of evidence that China is becoming imperialist, and no amount of simply saying, well, it doesn't count because it's China because of reasons, is going to negate that. So we have to start accepting that China is not a socialist country. In fact, it's a budgeting superpower, and in one day, I'm certain will be an empire that will be carrying out its own imperialist conquest of the world. So until that day, a lot of people need to start realizing what's really going on. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.